All right, wonderful. Um, Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'll just do a quick little introduction. My name is Siddharth. You can also call me Sid. I'll be moderating this panel today. I am a junior studying computer science and mathematics, and I use he, him pronouns. So just a few logistical notes. We'll talk for maybe 40 minutes with our wonderful panelists today, and then we can get into some of the questions from our audience. So if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question yourself, please put them in the public chat. Otherwise, you can also text me privately and I will cover your question at a question session after we're done with our pre-prepared questions. So without further ado, let's get started. If we could just do some quick introductions, starting with Megan, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. Megan Anzelk. My master's and PhD are from Northwestern. I finished my PhD in 2008. Since then, I've had a career in data science and AI across both the insurance industry as well as human capital and professional services. I'm based in Chicago, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. So happy to be here.
Thanks a lot, Megan. Could we next go with Sonali?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Sonali Dasgupta. I went to undergrad at Northwestern and graduated in 2009. I'm currently an analytics manager at IQVIA, and my background is biology and pharmacology.
Wonderful. And finally, Bill?
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here today. So let's see, I'm an assistant professor at Harvard, also been in a number of industries ranging from finance, sports analytics, medical imaging, AI, machine learning type things. Graduated 2010, I was in the ISP program and also did a master's in applied math at Northwestern.
Awesome. All right. So getting into some of our questions now. First off, what are some courses or experiences during your time here at Northwestern that really put you on your trajectory, inspired you to go into your industries? Let's start with Megan.
Sure. So I did my undergraduate work at Loyola, so just down the street from Northwestern. I majored in physics as an undergraduate as well. And the experiences that particularly impacted my career path was doing research internships in my summers as an undergraduate. So I did one in atmospheric chemistry at Loyola, and then the 3 following summers I did them at Argonne and Fermilab, the 2 Department of Energy national research laboratories in the Chicago suburbs. And that's what really inspired me to pursue a PhD. And originally my intent was to become a research scientist. So that was my original planned career path. And then that ended up changing.
Awesome. Sonali, could you go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So in college, I was on a pre-medical track. And so the general pre-med classes were really great in building fundamentals for biology. And I always knew that I wanted to work in healthcare and medicine. So after the pre-med courses, I actually found research methods, and some of the seminars I took that were upper level bio classes focused on dissecting research papers and studies to be most impactful. Data science actually ended up being really big in dissecting business questions and trying to work on answering client requirements. And so I found that those classes actually really were a lot more impactful than I had thought when I first took them.
And Bill?
Yeah, I would say, so when I joined undergrad, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. And so in that sense, ISP was perfect for me. I knew I'd like science, I like math, and in ISP, you get to do kind of all of that. And I would say the thing that kind of guided me is wanting to learn skills that are applicable to a number of different domains. So that like math classes were helpful. I definitely preferred kind of the hands-on coding classes. So when I got introduced to some, coding, I found out that, that'd be a good career path for me. And also to echo Megan's point, so I did a couple research kind of internship rotations, and that I felt that was really helpful as well, of kind of really understanding what research is like and actually solving real world problems, not just kind of ones in class.
Thanks a lot, Bill. And so, Megan, you mentioned there being kind of a pivot and also changing the path that you had originally thought of for yourself. And were there any factors that helped you make that decision?
Yeah, so there were two things while I was in graduate school. So two things that happened. One was the ability to be a full-time research scientist doing the kind of physics research I was doing. I was studying what happened nanoseconds after the Big Bang. So that really only happens at federal labs, right, with federal funding. And the lab had been under a hiring freeze for a number of years. And I learned sort of firsthand that you're at the whim of how the budgetary process works at the federal level. So sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. So I knew I could get a postdoc, but I wasn't sure I could get a full-time job. And I saw a lot of postdocs around me who were on their second or third or fourth postdoc, right? And I didn't really, that was not a career path that looked appealing to me. The second thing that happened is I was doing truly basic science research, so studying what happened nanoseconds after the Big Bang. And with very basic science research, the societal impacts of that work don't show up for multiple decades. So as an example, we have MRI machines in every hospital, in part because of research work that was done at Fermilab back in the 1980s. But it took decades before that research turned into productionalized MRI machines that we have kind of readily available in the healthcare system. So I wanted to do something where I could measure the impact in a shorter time period, maybe a few years, or even better, sort of a year or months, but not multiple decades. So those two things really led me to say, well, there must be physicists who have left academic and research physics and have gone into the private sector. And I'm sure some of them are both happy and successful. And I'm going to find people that fit that profile and then talk to them about their careers. So basically do lots of informational interviews. And that's how I eventually wound up doing data science in insurance. But it was through lots and lots of kind of exploration of potential career paths, lots of talking to very different people who had pursued very different career paths. And eventually got connected to someone in insurance, an industry I knew nothing about, and then found so fulfilling I stayed in that industry for a decade.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And Bill, Sonali, did you guys ever feel, of course, as Megan mentioned, I mean, sometimes with the turnarounds for these projects that can extend on for a really long time, and that just being a reality of research projects in STEM sometimes. Did you ever relate to this feeling, or of just like time frame, and did you ever have thoughts about changing over to something else? Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I can go first. To echo kind of what was just said regarding pivoting, I started off right after undergrad doing a master's in pharmacology. And so that to me was kind of like a stepping stone into working in biotech and research. So I started working in a small biotech company doing research and development. And I quickly learned that the drug development process is super big and long and can take many, many years. So definitely can identify with feeling frustrated by even while working in industry, having those timelines be very vague. And what actually stood out to me in all of that was the data analysis and the actual conclusions we were drawing and the things we were learning. And that's what eventually helped me pivot more into the data science world. So I wanted to have more direct impact immediately. And while the drug development process and research was really interesting to me. There's a lot of value that can be derived from the later stages of that process as well, with when you actually have data.
Yeah, I think I definitely commiserate with the feeling to want to do something impactful. And if I think about it, I think my favorite courses at Northwestern were like theoretical quantum physics, like those type of classes. And I think I became more translational over time. And in terms of pivots, I feel like my whole career has kind of been a pivot. So actually, right after undergrad, I worked in algorithmic trading for a couple of years. And I would say that the rationale for that was largely to pay off student loans, which I'm sure other people have as well. And so that, I would say there, I enjoyed what I was doing, but I didn't feel kind of that translational impact. But I would say most importantly, it introduced me kind of like machine learning when it was taking off. And that's when I decided to do a PhD. I started doing a PhD in computational neuroscience, ended up more doing computer vision and pure deep learning. And I started a startup in AI for medical imaging, saw that through to some extent and got acquired. And then so eventually, so I went from a startup working with a few people to kind of a big 7,000 or so person company. And I would say there's different pros and cons for both of those environments. It didn't quite feel like the best fit for me. And so that's when I decided to come back on kind of the research side, and now purely kind of research back in academia. And so I would say maybe upshot is like you don't necessarily need to pick exactly what you want to do. I would say that the guiding light is like work on things you find interesting and learn useful skills that can be applied to different things.
Thank you very much. So going off of that, it looks like in all of your cases, there's a good degree also of potentially working across industries and interdisciplinarity. And like Bill was saying about getting those skills and applying them wherever your profession takes you. Maybe we could start with Megan. This shift that you mentioned over to an insurance domain. How did that transition feel for you in the beginning? Did it feel kind of unfamiliar, and how did you develop when you made that pivot?
Yeah, so I think in some ways the transition was a little easier because my job search had taken quite a while. So after I defended and submitted my dissertation, my advisor was nice enough to keep me on payroll. So you actually get paid to do a physics PhD, really small amount of money, but you get paid. So I walked away. I've never spent $1 at tuition at Northwestern. So he kept me on payroll, but he knew I was going to be looking for a job full time, and he didn't really have connections to help me, right? He's like, I'm an academic physicist. I only know other physicists. But I want to make sure you keep healthcare and a little bit of money coming in so you don't feel tons of pressure, right? And you can find a job you enjoy. So that was really great of him. So over that time period, job searching, I was really terrible at the beginning of explaining to potential employers what skills I had that were valuable to them and translating why a PhD in physics was useful for any of these jobs. And it took me months to figure out how to describe that in a way that actually resonated with people. So a lot of trial and error through that. So I think by the time I actually started in the job, I had had a lot of exposure to a number of different companies sort of through the application process, a few through the interview process. And it spent a lot of this time like networking and doing informational interviews. So I think that helped me be a little more comfortable. And then the team that I joined in insurance, they were very clear of, we don't expect you to know anything about insurance. We'll teach you. The statistical methods they used were different than ones I knew. And the programming language they used was different than one I knew. And that was all clear to both of us in the interview process. And they had a really good internal training program to help people learn what they needed to know about insurance. So that helped on the domain side. And then sort of from borrowing people's code and course on the programming language, I was able to start learning that pretty quickly. And And then the statistical methods was really through working with other team members, right? And reading some of the like actuarial training materials, like the exam preparation for actuarial exams. Some of that I used as kind of reference material. So sort of multi-pronged in my learning of on the job, learning from teammates, formal training through a couple of small courses, and then sort of self-service learning through both internal training that was available and like textbook materials on a few different topics. The work itself was very similar in the sense of the goal was to bring data in, write code to input the data, clean it, analyze it, iterate, talk to your teammates, come back, make adjustments, do it again. That process was effectively the same thing I had done in graduate school, just this was insurance data rather than physics data. So the overarching sort of theme of the work was very similar, just a lot of the nuances were very different. So I think those two things kind of helped, kind of that understanding and clarity with the employer of what I needed to learn, and they were comfortable with that and had some tools to help me. And then the fact that I had been learning how to explain my skill set to people over a number of months, that I think also helped the transition be a little easier.
Fascinating. Thank you. So next, a question for Bill. What was your thinking when you decided to go into your PhD? What motivated you? What was your trajectory at that stage of your career?
Yeah, good question. I would say, yeah, so after undergrad, like I said, I went into kind of the finance and algorithmic trading. And this was like, 2011, 2012, when I would say machine learning kind of started to become the buzzword and started taking off in a sense. And so in undergrad, I learned, I also got a master's in applied math, but it was more kind of old school kind of differential equations. But then kind of on the job and being exposed to other groups within the company from the machine learning side, it seemed like it was going to have a promising future. And so I started getting exposed to machine learning on the job, and I thought, okay, this is pretty cool. I could see myself doing a PhD in it. But before I committed, I actually started volunteering in a lab at Northwestern while I was still working full time, just kind of before you really want to commit to a PhD, as Megan is well aware of, it's a lot of effort, a lot of years. So I wanted to make sure it was worth it. And after I volunteered in that lab, I thought, yeah, I actually do want to do this. And so I ended up just kind of quitting my job on the spot and then working in this lab a little bit more and eventually getting into the PhD program.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So now a more general question. What are some trends that you see in your profession, whether related to the pandemic or not? And anyone can take this first, whoever feels like it.
A couple of things I've noticed. So I've now been in the workforce for 15 years. So some of it is that the terminology changes. So, what's called data science today was called predictive modeling when I started, but they're the same thing. Some of the programming languages have changed over time. Some of the tool sets have changed over time. Like there's a lot more cloud computing today. So I think I give those examples because I think that continually learning new things has been critical to my own success in my career. You can't sort of learn what you learned in college or maybe even in your first job, and then that's going to be sufficient to serve you over a career. So that's one thing I've seen is that the tool sets, the techniques, the what's trendy now, what kinds of problems can people solve as the development of machine learning and data science tools matures. All of that stuff continually changes over time. So I think that continuously learning mindset has been really helpful to me. I think the other thing is that depending upon the company, different teams often put their analytics teams like inside their IT organizations, and then some put them under like marketing or a business unit or things like that. And there's ebbs and flows in that too over time of kind of where you report up into, and that can influence the kind of problems you work on. And then I think now with the sort of like we're currently in this hype cycle around generative AI and tools like ChatGPT. So there's a lot of people who are fearful of it. There's a lot of people that are really curious. And so part of, I think in my opinion, the role for people like us who have training in some of these areas is to help people understand through whatever methods we have accessible. So whether it's, talking to a coworker who has some curiosity about it, or, maybe your professor wrote your recommendation letter in ChatGPT, or right, whatever it may be. I think as a community, it's useful for us to have sort of take advantage of the opportunity to help other people learn what these tools really are, so that we can reduce some of the fear and misunderstanding, and help people see the real positive opportunities that are available if you kind of approach things the right way. So those are a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, I guess kind of piggybacking on that, it's a good point of there's hype cycles come and go, and some of it's real and sticks, and some of it's hype. And so I think there's a real skill in understanding what's real opportunity and kind of leveraging that, but not just following the hype, more taking kind of calculated risks. And I guess in terms of what's changed in my profession, it's, things have gone over the place. There's been a couple of hype cycles in AI generally. I'd say when I first started working on it back maybe 2012, 2013, and then deep learning like 2015, 2016 also was kind of at a peak, and then it kind of took a trough, and then recently it's been peaking up again. So I think there's a real niche of like finding what is real and speaking a way that kind of avoids that hype. So trying to focus on doing good science and good data analysis, and not kind of cherry picking things, and that'll kind of get you a long way.
Yeah, and to add to that, I totally echo what both Bill and Megan just said. But I think in healthcare especially, I've seen a lot of these similar hypes and trends pop up because people want to start using the most new technology and the coolest tools, and try to start just kind of applying them to every problem. But I think really thinking about those new technologies as tools and trying to map them to an actual problem and thinking through how to use that to solve your problem is really crucial, because not every new technology is going to be applicable to an industry or a type of data. And I think that that's definitely something I've noticed trends of the shiny new object being just thrown onto a healthcare data set or something, but it just doesn't fit. And so truly understanding the technology and seeing how it can be useful to solve your problem is really key.
Wonderful. Thank you. Very interesting insights. I think we're getting some questions in the chat right now, and a lot of them are revolving around kind of your experiences as you're looking for your first job. And I think this also kind of relates to what we've been talking about with these hype cycles. And it's like when you're going out into the job market, this feeling of, oh, there's this one thing that is really popular that everybody is just like striving for. But for example, one of the questions we have is, what advice do you have for students who are wrapping up their final year of school, who are looking for their first jobs? Was there anything you struggled with when during your first few weeks, and what advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah, I can start. So yeah, it's definitely a very intimidating feeling. So when I first started applying to data science roles, I was coming from fully a pharma background, and there were other people who had experience coding, who had experience with analytics, whereas I hadn't taken any coding classes in college or grad school. And so I think, to what Megan mentioned earlier, having a lot of informational interviews was really helpful for me, understanding how to tell your story, how to kind of weave that narrative of what brought you to where you are. That's really important because there will always be a learning curve and things you learn on the job. Especially as an entry level applicant, no company is going to expect you to know everything. It's often a new domain, it's often going to be a new working structure, new skills. So being able to connect the skills that you have learned and what you know to the new role is going to be a big differentiating factor. And one way to really do that is through having conversations, practice interviews, informational calls. What helped me was trying to learn how other people talked about their role and the types of examples they used, and then trying to see if there was something in my experience that I could replicate that with.
Yeah, definitely echo the point of practice. And I would say it depends a lot on the industry and specific job you're applying to. But I think a tendency kind of analytical people have, and I fell in this trap, is you feel like you need to prepare for every single possible question they can ask you, which is helpful to have like some, maybe go through the exercise once, but then have a core set of questions that you know they're going to ask that you essentially have ironed down. And so that kind of takes anxiety off a little bit of like, you don't need to be perfect at everything, but like, as long as I'm good at these three things, I can kind of get through a conversation.
I would agree with all of that. And I would add three things. So one is when I finished in 2008, that was a really terrible job market. So it was in the housing crisis and the Great Recession. So I applied to over 300 jobs, got only 6 interviews and 1 real job offer. So I think that's something to keep in mind, is that sometimes job searching is really hard and it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with what's going on in the market. And other times it can go really quickly. So just to know that things that are out of your control will influence what that looks like for you, at least should help you feel not alone in it. Second is, I think to your sort of opening question, Sid, of, wanting to sort of get into something that's the hot field. I didn't approach my career that way. I just really liked hard problems, and I like that kind of analysis and learning about, learning things and then finding a way to do that in a way that I could actually apply to help businesses. It's, when I talk to people today, they're like, your background's amazing because you have all this experience in AI and you've done AI in highly regulated industries and all of that. And that's true, but none of that was planned, right? So there's some amount of like luck meeting opportunity and preparation. And then the third thing I would say is to not worry as much as you can. This is easy advice to give, hard to take. For that first job, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the most amazing thing. It doesn't have to meet all of your dream criteria. It just has to be good enough, right? I think like you were saying, Bill, of your proprietary trading job, part of that was to help pay back your student loans. There's nothing wrong with that, of saying like, I want to live in this city and make at least this amount of money. And I don't care if the job is boring to start because I have these other things that are more important to me. You have a very long career ahead of you. It's really hard to see from where you're sitting, but you'll be able to change and change your mind and decide you like some things and don't like other things, and change companies and industries. You're going to have lots of opportunity to do that more than once in your career. So don't feel like you have to get it all right the first time. I don't think anybody does. Some of us just get lucky, but that's lucky. That's not planned, right? And again, sometimes the job market means you take the job that was offered to you and then you hope it works out. And if it doesn't, then you go find another job. So those are the 3 things I would add, but I echo what Sonali and Bill said.
Thank you. Really, really comforting advice. So the next question, is there any networking advice that you found specifically helpful in your industry, or did you ever find certain kinds of networking to be relevant when you were searching for jobs?
I think all three of us have talked about doing informational interviews. So if you don't know what those are, just quickly Google it. And then Northwestern probably has in their career services, they have some good guidance around how to conduct them and how to ask people for one. But really what you're doing is you're having like a 20 or 30-minute conversation and asking a bunch of fairly basic questions about someone's career. What do you like? What do you do all day? What do you hate? What do you wish you had known when you were me? Right? The same kinds of questions we're having in this panel, right? That same concept. You're basically doing an informational interview with three people at once. I found when I was doing that, I was often reaching out to people totally cold, complete strangers, didn't know me. I didn't have an introduction into them. And what I found was that most people were happy to give me 20 minutes of their time. And people that weren't able to meet over the phone or Zoom would at least often let me send them the questions over email, and then they could respond whenever they had time. So being prepared for those and having kind of a core set of questions I followed helped a lot. Some people ghosted me, some people never wrote back, and I just kept asking other people. And then as I did those, I always asked a final question of who else should I talk to? And that helped me grow my network in ways that were different than what I would have like sort of set out to choose. And sometimes turned into sort of unexpected happy surprises of meeting people I never would have expected to meet, or learn about an industry I had never thought would be of any interest. So I think knowing that it's okay, like it's scary to totally reach out to a stranger who looks like they've had this amazing career and ask them for time. People are generally really happy to help. Northwestern alumni are particularly good because I still do informational interviews today. And so often I'll say, hey, we both went to Northwestern. Can I ask you for 5 minutes and just ask you some stuff about your organization? 90% of the time people say yes. So I wouldn't be afraid of asking, and then don't let the few people that ignore you or say no deter you from continuing to ask.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I started job searching right in the middle of the pandemic, so like June 2020, and a large part of me quelling my anxieties was to reach out to as many people as possible. And a big cohort of that was Northwestern alumni and grad school alumni. And so totally echo what Mecca just said of reaching out to people, asking them questions about their day to day. I think if you also make your interest and your intentions obvious of wanting to know more and kind of put that energy out there, a lot of times people will keep you in mind for future conversations if they hear of an opportunity or know someone else who's hiring. You're top of mind and you've expressed the fact that you're really interested in a specific type of problem or role or industry. And I found also that people are more willing than not to help.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all that. And then there's also networking with each other. So even though you're all looking for jobs now, 10 years down the line, you'll be in a different place and be like, oh yeah, remember so and so. So just, yeah, I guess when it comes to networking, I would say do it. It's something I wish I had done more, but it's important to do it kind of all levels.
Thank you. And then, all right. So, what are your organization's expectations for working in the office and or remotely? And how do you think the nature of work has changed with the pandemic and just going hybrid, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I think I've seen it kind of all over the place. For me in particular, it's kind of, on academic research side, it's super flexible. I can essentially do whatever I want, but I actually do like coming to the office. Previously, I was at a bigger company after a startup was acquired. It was the same thing. It was completely remote at that point and no expectation of coming to office. But I've been seeing more and more that people are kind of being forced to come in, and sometimes that makes people leave, and sometimes that people have used it as kind of a recruiting tactic of you don't have to come in. And so it's really kind of all over the place at this point.
Yeah, my company has been remote friendly actually since like before the pandemic. And they have global offices and a large workforce that's worked remotely since the start. So making that transition was smooth for me, but I know that there are a lot of teams across the country that do have more of a hybrid work style. And so some teams actually do require their members to come in once or twice a week, depending on how close they are to an office.
So I'm looking for my next role now. So I'm job searching currently. So I'm talking to lots of companies and lots of different industries and recruiters. And I think there's a mix. I think some of the things you've seen in the news of more conservative industries like banks requiring more in-office time, that I think is real. I do think there's been some pushes. There's been kind of this pendulum swing, in my view, of trying to find that right balance for a lot of companies between remote and hybrid and in office. I think the other piece that might not be so obvious I would never have been able to see this when I was in your shoes, is the other pieces that play into these decisions. So there's a lot of companies that have large corporate real estate presence, and those corporate real estate leases are often for I mean, I don't even know if any of them are as short as 5 years, right? They're 10, 15, 20-year leases. Other companies have spent a lot of money building new buildings. So Salesforce is an example. They just built a brand new building downtown Chicago. You would expect that those companies that have a lot of money sunk into corporate real estate are going to be pushing more people to come back to the office. Or a company whose business is dependent on corporate real estate is going to be pushing for people to come back to the office. There's also, I think, kind of different work style pieces playing into it. In my opinion, I think there's a lot of executives who got really, in pre-pandemic times, got really used to having like an executive assistant right outside their door. Somebody would grab them lunch in the middle of the day. They were a bit sort of catered to. And I think a lot of them miss that and want to be back in an office where they kind of, get to sort of hold court over things. So I think there's like culture and style differences that are playing into this as well. That isn't, all of this is to say it's not all sort of logic and reason around like actual worker productivity or what people's preferences are. There's bigger factors at play some of the times. And I would say to your earlier question, Sid, right, I think this is another area that regardless of your industry has changed a lot over the past few years and probably will continue to change for a while. Right, because there's certainly pushback from lots of different groups of employees, especially people with little kids who have huge childcare costs, that it's just, it doesn't make sense to try to force everybody to come back all the time. So I think we're still going to see this, in my opinion. I think it's going to be tumultuous for a while yet, and a while might be a few years. And then I think we'll start settling in. I don't think we're all going to go back to the way things were pre-pandemic. I don't think like everybody's going to go back to the office 5 days a week. Because frankly, people weren't before, they just didn't talk about it. So that wasn't even a real thing, right? Maybe in my dad's time, right, in the 70s and 80s, maybe it was, but not sort of in more recent history, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to add from like an employee's perspective, I feel like I'm really interested to see how working remotely really impacts career growth, because I feel like at different stages of your career, there are different kind of things you can learn from being in the office that are really crucial and valuable to learning how to communicate well with like executives or teammates. And I think with remote work, there's just has to be a bit more intention behind that. And those really casual interactions or quick conversations about projects just have to be more planned. And so I think that's also something to consider for recent grads who are going into the workforce, of thinking about what you want your first couple of years right out of school to look like, and the skills that you want to build up during that time.
Yeah, I was gonna echo the same thing of even if there isn't a policy that you need to come in, it still can be in your best interest to come in to kind of networking, all these things we've been talking about, and yeah, catching someone in the hallway that you'd never run into otherwise.
Thank you very much. So next question. Hmm, was there ever a time in your career where you felt like you where you questioned the progression or the feel your feeling of the growth of your career? Um, you could think of it in terms of like staying static in a certain job position versus moving up the ladder, you could say. And have you ever had thoughts around just the mobility of your job in that sense?
I would
Lots of
say,
times.
yeah, exactly. That was gonna say all the time. Yeah, I would say from my standpoint, I mean, there was several times in my career where I felt like, yeah, this is just not going anywhere. I think maybe more recently, and the heaviest I felt that. So I started a startup coming out of my PhD. It was unclear at the time if I really wanted to fully commit there. I had some other opportunities, and I would say like 2 to 3 years, it felt like we were going nowhere. Meanwhile, like these other opportunities were taking off, and it was a tough time. And then fortunately, it kind of felt like a 4 year kind of overnight success, and all of it came together. But I was lucky. It doesn't have to go that way. And I think to echo other points of like sometimes there's things out of your control, and these things happen. I would say the thing that kind of got me through that is feeling like you're still working on an important problem and you're still learning, even if things aren't moving. And if something fails, okay, that's fine. You'll be able to have another job. Like, we all have skills we develop, and it's going to be fine.
I think I would add, certainly sometimes where I felt like I was getting pushback from an employer where I wanted to continue to learn and grow my skill set, and I wasn't getting the opportunities that I thought I had demonstrated I could handle. And so I've often changed companies as a result, right? If I really felt like I couldn't get anywhere with the company, I certainly try always. So I have moved companies more than some other people. So the longest I've stayed anywhere is a little over 4 years. And I've never stayed in a single job. Yeah, a single job more than 4 years. So I've also either been promoted or changed kind of role in an organization in between. I've also been laid off twice. And so that's a whole nother sort of tumultuous thing where, clearly it doesn't feel like it's going well and you're immediately kind of on the job hunt, and can be very stressful. I think what I've learned through all of those experiences is that networking piece and continuing to sort of grow my network and cultivate my network. I think like Bill was saying before, of like staying in touch with people you knew in school or worked with in your first job. I still have some of those relationships and they've continued to be helpful. And continuing to sort of keep an eye out for your own career. There's nobody that cares about it more than you do. And so you really have to advocate for yourself. And advocating for yourself can be having a conversation about getting a raise or a project assignment, or it can be advocating for yourself by finding a better opportunity somewhere else. So there's lots of different ways to do it, but I think that sort of keeping in mind that you care most and no one will work harder for your own career than you is also important.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. In my experience, when my first job, which was at a biotech startup, I was there for around 4 years, and I, throughout the years of being there, had gotten promoted, but I also received some pushback from further career growth in that company. Less so because of what I was contributing, but more so because um, it didn't necessarily align with what the company was trying to do. They were super focused on getting a drug to market, which at a startup, you have limited funds and resources and a short timeline to get all of that done. So it made sense from that standpoint. But from someone who had just started their career, I think I went into it a bit naive, thinking that I was going to get some of that career development support that I had expected, but it was kind of conflicting with the timelines that the company was working on and their overall focus. And so I found that the next company that I started working for was a lot bigger and more established and had revenue pressures in a different way than the startup did. And there was more room for that career development support and connections within the company. So I think really thinking about what you need at that stage and catering your job search to that sort of working environment is also really key. I could foresee myself going back to a more fast-paced startup environment once I kind of have built out some of those key fundamental management and bigger like organizational pieces that I think will help me move to the next step. So I would think through kind of big goals of what you'd want in your career and kind of cater the search to that, to what you need at the time.
Thank you very much. Really good advice. So kind of going off of that, were there, and Megan, kind of what you said about, advocating for yourself, were there ever situations where you felt that your interests were being covered well by the management in your company, or say your research supervisor, be it anyone in a higher position? And what did you do in situations like that? How did you navigate it when you felt like your needs were not being satisfied?
Yeah,
Whoever wants to go.
Sorry for just jumping right in. I've done it sort of in different ways depending upon the situation. So when I was doing my PhD, I had an advisor who was good. I had a very good PhD experience compared to lots of other people. But there was a postdoc in our research group who wanted me to use a completely different analysis method that would have meant starting over from scratch. And there wasn't like a really good reason for it. And so I think I actually contacted the ombudsman at Northwestern just to understand like what I could and couldn't do in this situation. And then I actually put a whole thesis plan together for my advisor. So I was already a couple years in. I was hoping to finish within the next year or so. And so I put together a whole outline of what I thought constituted my dissertation. And of that, which pieces I had already completed, which ones were partially done, basically like a mini project plan, along with all the supporting materials. And this was something a grad school friend of mine who went to a different university suggested. She was like, you want to like thump the paper down on his desk so he can see, he gets like a physical reaction to the volume of work you've put in so far. So I followed her advice, put together this whole project plan, and then printed all the supporting pieces that would become parts of my dissertation and supplement my dissertation. And very quickly, it was not a confrontational conversation at all. He very quickly sort of said, yep, this all makes sense. I think he was impressed that I had done the work to sort of put it all together. So in grad school, that got resolved pretty quickly. In companies, I've had lots of different situations. I've been denied promotions. I had a new person reporting to me transfer from a different department who it turned out was making more than me, but held a position below me. So I had to have that whole conversation. Some work out better than others, but I think being very clear about what I'm asking for, why I'm asking for it, and any evidence I can use to back it up. And I did this when I was negotiating my first job too, and Northwestern's career services were super helpful in that, of saying what were appropriate salary ranges I should expect, and what were other pieces of the job offer I could negotiate. And again, I was very clear about, this is what I need to say yes. I want to say yes. I'm excited. I want to be there. This is what I'm looking for. And if you put that together, I'll sign today. So I think that sort of the theme is the having a very clear, articulate argument that is based on facts, not emotions, with as much evidence as I could have to support my argument. I don't win them all. I've lost many of them. I've won many of them. But then at least I feel good about the way I've gone about it. And then I can choose whether I want to stay or go or try something else.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. And kind of relatedly, one thing I've found useful if there's a disagreement or you're arguing for certain things or different opinions is starting with the goal. So what is the goal here? And if we can get on the same page of the goal, then it can be easy to motivate the steps below that. But sometimes if you go in kind of hard on some details when you're not agreeing with the goal, it kind of won't formulate that way. So just as Megan was saying, like kind of here's the goal, here's how I think we can get there, here's evidence of my reasoning, and pause when you need to. Sometimes when something happens, you get super frustrated, everybody gets super frustrated. Learn to take a step back and maybe take a day to pause and then respond instead of in the moment.
Thank you so much. Really. Yeah. Oh, go ahead,
Oh,
Sonal.
sorry. Yeah, no, I was just gonna add a quick thing is, yeah, like I shared, I also definitely been in situations where things haven't necessarily gone the way I expected because of a promotion. Sometimes, again, things may be out of your control. Maybe the company as a whole is not doing as well as it has in previous quarters, or there are just other extenuating circumstances that you might not know about, which might be preventing the promotion or the raise or a bonus or something. And so I think it's always important to keep that in mind, but also the things that you can control is just like putting yourself in like your manager's shoes and thinking about like how can you best present what value you bring to the team, or have concrete evidence of things that you have done that are really valuable and are kind of like those evidence pieces that Megan mentioned, things that'll help support the case for your promotion or bonus or something.
All right. Thank you so much for some really, really great advice. I think we all learned so much today. So thank you again to everyone for logging on today. And thank you to our wonderful panelists. We will now head back to our main Zoom room soon, where we have some final closing remarks from our program planners. So feel free to leave this breakout room and head back. Thanks a lot.